Hello everyone, this is Dr. Saurabh Kose, Head and Associate Professor, Department of Pharmacy Practice, ISF College of Pharmacy, Moga, Punjab, India. And I'm going to talk about past unsafe human experimentations in the clinical research and the drug development phases in the past. So as you know that this ongoing drug development process, there are various past experimentations were done by the various researchers, but hypothetically done. It was not scientifically sound, and there were no certain evidences which showed up technology where we can tell that human safety indexing was there. So today we are going to discuss about the various timeline of the clinical research, like what are the various unsafe human experimentations which were done in the past where it leads to the civilization of the medicine. To start with, in 605 BC, Book of Daniel, it is considered as the world's first clinical trial, and it is recorded in the book of Daniel in the Holy Bible. This experiment resembles a clinical trial which was conducted by King Daniel under the order of King, a resourceful military leader. And during his research, he ordered two groups to eat as per their wish. So one group was ordered to eat meat and drink wine, and another group, which were of royal blood, was preferred to eat vegetables. So they were allowed to have vegetable diet, diet of legumes, different type of beans, and water for 10 days. So for 10 days, there were two groups. One group were eating non-veg and wine, and another group was on the vegetarian diet and some diet of legumes. After the 10 days, it was expected to come that the vegetarian appeared better nourished than the meat eaters. So then the king permitted the legume lovers to continue in their diet. And this probably was the first of the experiment of the times in the evaluation of human species, that an open, uncontrolled human experiment guided decision about public health. So public health is a concern of very serious process where the molecule or medicine or anything, food or drug, which has to be uh, eaten up, has a safety profile. In 500 BC, Hippocratic Oath came, which is, sorry, Hippocrates is considered as the father of Western medicine, and wherein this medicine part, uh, to cure the patient at any time of the day. It may be night time, it may be nocturnal, nighttime, daytime, and to serve the physician in the society with morals, with not in the deed or greed of money or some malpractice. So thereafter, after this old 2004-year-old oath bears on his name, and the physicians, medical healthcare professionals swear to practice medicine justly, justifiably, and ethically due to this Hippocratic oath. Whereas pharmacists take pharmacist oath in the white coat ceremony to practice the profession of pharmacy in a ethical manner. Then in 1025 AD, Avicenna came up, which is written in the Canon of Medicine, which states that, as per the medical encyclopedia, Canon of Medicine, that every therapy should be started with herbal preparations. So, okay, in the body there are illness, there are disease, and interestingly, this should come as a outcome. So, this rule suggests a contemporary approach for the clinical trial, but thereafter there were no such evidences which states that this is one of the best one. Basically, these scriptures are written in Urdu language, which states these narrations in the Persian Galen, Avicenna. And then in 1537, Sir Ambrose Pare, the first clinical trial of an Arab novel therapy, was conducted by the famous French surgeon Ambrose Pare in 1537. So in the battlefield with the wounded soldiers, they were supplying conventional oil to adequate to wound the heels. But ultimately, he applied some other oil applied in the place of wounds with some made up of yolks of eggs, oils of roses, and turpentine. And in this case, the soldiers were feeling little pain or less pain sensation, and ultimately they had good sleep cycles at the nighttime sleep, and ultimately it became one of the remedy. In 1747, James Lind Scurvy experiment. So, Sir James Lind is every year on 21st of May, we celebrate the birthday of Sir James Lind in his memory of world's first clinical trial. So, Sir James Lind did wonderful experiments with the scurvy in his first experiments. He was a Scottish physician in the British Navy, and tested a theory with the citric acids could prevent and cure scurvy, a huge problem among sailors at the time. So, as a result of scurvy, sailors suffered poor wound healing, skin changes, and loosening of teeth. So, with no way to treat scurvy, many sailors died at sea. So, during Sir James Lind trial, 12 patients affected soldiers were divided into 6 groups, with each group receiving a different supplement in addition to the regular diet, like cedar sulfuric acid, vinegar, seawater, oranges, lemons, spicy paste with barley water were all tested. So the group receiving the citrus fruit saw positive effects and becoming recovering very easily. So coming on to the part which states that on to the selected 12 patient got cured on the time. So this was the one day this cedar sulfuric acid and all the citrus fruits due to Sir James Lind came into the action. In year 1800, arrival of placebo. So the word placebo first appeared in the medical literature in the early 1800s. Hooper's Medical Dictionary of 1811 defined it as epithet given to any medicine more to please than benefit the patient. And in the 1863, the US physician Austin Flint planned the first clinical study comparing a dummy remedy to active treatment. So thereafter came, meanwhile, then there is another term called as nocebo, which is a negative effect of placebo, is also concern of study nowadays. So he treated some 13 patients suffering from rheumatism with an herbal extract, which was advised instead of an established remedy. In 1886, Flint described the study in his book, Treatise on the Principles and Practice of Medicine. This was given regularly and become well known in all the words placeboic remedy for the rheumatism. So, arrival of placebo. In 1887, National Institute of Health was founded. Originally named the Hygienic Laboratory, the National Institute of Health was founded by Joseph J. Kenyon. Today, the National Institute of Health is the largest source of funding for medical research in the world, investing more than $31 billion annually to support the scientific discovery. So, this is the one center worldwide they are giving the funding opportunities to the budding researchers. In 1906, whereas this milestones came called as the FDA Pure Food and Drug Act. So the President Theodore Roosevelt signed the FDA Pure Food and Drug Act in the law which regulated that products could not be sold for indications outside the labeling and prohibited interstate transportation of unlawful foods and drugs in the United States of America, so Foods and Drugs Administration. In 1928, one accidental discovery, I would say, came up by Sir Alexander Fleming, who discovered the penicillin by not intentionally but accidentally. So, Alexander Fleming cultured an anti-G lab yielded one of the most important discoveries of the past era in the history of medicine, as penicillin was identified on mold growing on a stalk of Staphylococcus culture. Soon thereafter, penicillin was recognized as one of the most efficacious life-saving drugs in the world, forever changing the treatment of bacterial infections. 1932 to 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis studies, which lasted for 4 decades, and this 40 years improvised syphilis positive African Americans were lied to missile in the name of science. The US Public Health Service conducted studies on 600, where the 399 treatment and 201 control uh, subjects were studied of syphilis subjects, which they did not perform the biomedical ethics process containing obtaining the informed consent, and were denied access to a penicillin, a proven treatment for syphilis. And many died as infected others with the disease and passed congenital syphilis to their children. So it becomes genetic. In 1937, Elixir sulfonamide disaster took the place, where this was indicated, and almost 700 US death was found. In 1938, the Federal Foods and Drugs Cosmetics Act came, and there was one dreadful event in the medical history called as the World War II in the Japan, and this was conducted from 1939 to 1945, where a series of medical experiments was conducted by the German Nazism party on large number of concentration camps prisoners during World War II. As a part of the Holocaust, prisoners were subjected to hazardous experiments with the goal of developing new weapons to aid in treatment injured German soldiers and to advance their eugenic radical ideologies. These experiments often resulted into death, disfigurement, and permanent disability. Then the next part which come up is called as the experiments on twins, where there were experiment on the twin children in concentration camps were created to show the similarities and differences in the genetics of twins, as well as to see if the human body can be unnaturally manipulated. So the central leader of the experiments was Joseph Mengele, who was from 1943 to 44 performed experiments on almost 1,500 sets of imprisoned twins at Auschwitz. About 200 people survived these studies, and the twins were arranged by their age and sex and kept in barracks between experiments, which ranged from injection of different dyes into the eyes of twins to say whether it would change their colors, to sewing twins together in attempt to create conjoined twins. So without using anesthesia, the body organ parts were differentiated, and they were tried to holocausts, and that leads to certain kind of experimentation problems. Then bone, muscle, and nerve transplantation experimentations from the September 1942 to December 1943, and the experiments were conducted at the concentration camp for the benefit of the German armed forces to study bone, muscle, nerve regeneration, bone transplantation from one person to another, and sections of bones, muscles, nerves were removed from the subjects without the use of anesthesia. As a result of these operations, many victims suffered intense agony, mutilation, and permanent disability. Disfigurement was there. In mid 1942, in the Baranowicz occupied Poland, hand injury experiments were conducted in a small building behind the private home occupied by a known Nazi security service officer, in which a young boy of 11 or 12 years was strapped to a chair so he could not move. Above him was a mechanical hammer coming on a constant speed that every few seconds came down upon his head. The boy was driven insane from this torture. In 1941, the freezing experiment, the Luftwaffe conducted experiment with the intent of discovering means to prevent and to treat hypothermia, and there were around 360 to 400 experiments and 280 to 300 victims, indicating some victims suffered more than one experiment. Another study placed prisoners naked in open air for several hours with temperature as low as -6 or 21 degree Fahrenheit. And besides studying these physical effects of cold exposure, the experimenters also assessed different methods of rewarming survivors. One assistant later testified that some victims were thrown into boiling water for rewarming. So, a cold water immersion experiment at Dachau concentration camp, you can see in the picture, was left untreated. Malaria experiment in 1942 to 1945 took the place, where immunization for treatment of malaria, where the healthy inmates were infected by mosquitoes or by injections of extracts of the mucus glands of female mosquitoes. After contracting the disease, the subjects were treated with various drugs to test their relative efficiency. Over 1,200 people were used in these experiments, and more than half died as a result. Immunization experiment at the German concentration camps at the Dachau. This scientists tested immunization compounds and serums for the prevention and treatment of contagious diseases, including malaria, typhus, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, yellow fever, infectious hepatitis, etc. Sulfonamide experiments around for 1 year, 1942 to 43. You see in the earliest sulfonamide elixir causes 700 deaths into the US. Seawater experiment from the July 1944 to September 40, 1944. Experiments were done again at the concentration camps. So as you can see, sterilization experiments, mustard gas experiment, experiment with poisons or high altitude experiment, blood coagulation experiment, multi-center trials. Various unsafe past human experiments tell only one thing, that there should be a consent as per the biomedical ethics, safety, individual impairment, no birth defect, no congenital anomaly, no harm to the patient must be there. So, in this multiple site representing a significant change in the studies, significant change in the results, significant participation with a wider range of population group, strengthens research trial design and analysis. So particularly IMARC is one institute which is looking after this timeline of the clinical research. In 1944, a multi-center study significantly started to conduct the clinical trial at all places. In 1944 to 1974, human radiation experiments during the Cold War, thousands of US citizens become the innocent and unknowing victim of around 4,000 secret experiments sponsored by the US government, aimed at the determining the effects of atomic radiation on the human body, often using doses likely to harm the subjects. The majority of victims included vulnerable groups such as prisoners, pregnant women, children, improvised or disabled patients. In 1947, and post the process of this thalidomide disaster, before thalidomide disaster, this Nuremberg Code came after the 1945 World War was stopped. So during 1939 to 1945, after the World War and for the Nazism era, this Nuremberg Code came up, where the 23 members of the Nazism party, German Nazism party, who were tried for the crimes against the humanity or the mankind for this unsafe and hazardous human experiments on the unwilling peoples and the prisoners during the war, which resulted into a verdict contained a set of 10 ethical principles for human experimentation. And this code established the requirement for the informed consent, absence of coercion, properly formulated scientific experimentation, and beneficence towards the experiment. participants. In 1951, Henrietta Lack's HeLa cells from her the uh, this cells comes to a medical sciences, but she never knew or intended it to happen during the treatment of her cervical cancer. Cells were taken from her tumor without her knowledge, and the researcher George O.T. Gay took these cells and noticed that remarkably the cells could be kept alive in culture. Her cells would eventually become HeLa and commonly used in biomedical research. Since the extraction of Henrietta's cells, some 20 tons of cells have been grown from the HeLa line or distributed to researchers across the world. These cells were used to test the first polio vaccine in 1950 and have been since used for the treatment of AIDS and cancer research, as well as many other scientific pursuits. In 1964, the Declaration of Helsinki came, and this Declaration of Helsinki expand on the 10 principles necessary for ethical human experimentation set forth in the Nuremberg Code developed by the World Medical Association. In Japan, First World Medical Health Assembly, where the Declaration of Helsinki was announced, and after the thalidomide disaster, which took place from 1957 to 62, after a couple of years, this Declaration of Helsinki came into the existence, which shows the inception in June 1964. It has undergone 7 revisions till date. The last sixth one was 2008, and the seventh one was 2015. The focus of the declaration is on the respect for the subject's right to self-determination, and their right to make informed decisions regarding research participation. It stands as clear as powerful statement that the rights of the human subjects shall never be compromised of the science. In 1974, the National Research Act came, where the US President of that time, Richard Nixon, signed the National Research Act into the law, the response primarily to the Tuskegee syphilis study. And the act requires that all research using human subjects be reviewed by an institutional review board as another step to ensure protection of human subjects. In 1974, FDA Bureau of Medical Devices and Diagnostic Products, where the advances in technology lead to a significant growth in the medical device field, yet the industry was still operating based on device regulations from the Federal Food, Drugs and Cosmetics Acts of 1938. Clearly updated regulations were needed. In February 1974, the FDA created the Bureau of Medical Devices and Diagnostic Products to meet this need. In 1979, the Belmont Report came, which developed primarily in response to the Tuskegee syphilis study. The Belmont Report explained the three unifying ethical principles to guide human research, that is, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So, the Belmont Report has become the primarily ethical framework for protecting human research subject in the United States of America. In 1981, the FDA Regulations Title 21 came up. In follow-up of this Belmont report, FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services formally revised regulations for human subjects protection by creating Title 21, which includes the regulations for the protection of human subjects, Part 50, Financial Disclosure 54, IRB Part 56, IND Part 312, Investigational Device Exemption Part 812, and Electronic Records called Part 11. In 1990, ICH International Conference or Congress on Harmonization Guidelines came into the existence, where the European nations, along with the Japan, United States, being creating plans for global harmonization of regulatory requirements to reduce duplicate, time-consuming, expensive procedures needed to market products internationally while maintaining safeguards of quality, safety, and efficacy. This need led to the creation of the ICH guidelines in April 1990. In 1991, the common rule came up, where the common rule is yet another set of ethics involving the protection of human subjects. Captured in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 45, Part 46, the rule describes the type of research subject to regulation. The rule also sets forth the requirement for the institutional review board's oversight of clinical trials. Detailed production of human subjects regarding informed consent was taken up. In 1993, Medwatch was launched by the FDA as a system designed to collect health professional reports of adverse events involving medical products. So, when the safety hazards are detected, the FDA issues medical product safety alerts or audits, product recalls, withdrawals, or labeling changes, which is a preliminary guideline, whereas the drug speaks to protect the public health. In 1996, the WHO guidelines for the GCP came up with the justification for conducting a clinical trial, protocol, production of subjects, responsibility of investigators, sponsors, monitors, assurance of data integrity, product accountability, roles, and regulatory authorities. So, yet, my dear friends, the timeline of the clinical trial is as such, which I told, like in 605 BC Book of Daniel, 500 BC the Hippocratic Oath, 105 to 5 AD Avicenna Canon of Medicine, in 1537 Ambrose Pare, the specific first clinical trial of novel therapy. In 1747 James Lind's scurvy experiment. In 1800 arrival of placebo. 1887 National Institute of Health founded. FDA Pure Drug Act. And 19 particularly century passed away. So in 1906 FDA Pure Food and Drugs Act. 1928 Sir Alexander Fleming discovery of penicillin. 1932 to 1972 the Tuskegee syphilis study. In the 1937 elixir sulfonamide disaster. 1938 Federal Food and Drugs Cosmetics Act series. 1939 to 45 World War II experiments. 1944 multi-center studies. 1944 to 74 human radiation experiments. 1947 Numberberg Code. 1951 Henrietta Lacks. 1957 to 62 thalidomide disaster in the world's biggest medical disaster till date. 1964 Declaration of Helsinki. 1974 the National Research Act. 1974 FDA Bureau of Medical Devices and Diagnostic Products. The Belmont Report in 1979. 1981 FDA Regulations Title 21. 1990 International Conference on Harmonization Guidelines. 1991 the Common Rule. 1993 Medwatch. 1996 the World Health Organization Guidelines. So, dear friends, this was past unsafe human experimentations. Thank you so much for watching.